Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Roach Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our video. We've got a top 25 matchup in college basketball in the SEC on Saturday night on ESPN with the Kentucky Wildcats traveling on the road to the Auburn Tigers. This is the only time that these two teams face each other this season, and it's a very important game in the SEC standings. Kentucky is 2 games back of the Alabama Crimson Tide for the SEC lead, and Auburn is 1 game back. I'm going to preview and predict which team can get a massive win in the SEC that would be able to help their chances of staying in the SEC title race and give themselves a great win for their NCAA tournament resume. Now, the Kentucky Wildcats, they're 17-7 and 7-4 in the SEC. They're having a solid season, but things have gone south a little bit lately for John Calipari's squad, so much so that Kentucky fans are going out there yet again and throwing pitchforks at John Calipari, saying he needs to go. It's time for him to be fired. That's not going to happen, obviously, but Kentucky is slipping a bit. They are now a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament bracket matrix. Their resume for the tournament is a bit thin. They need to rack up some big wins in the SEC down the stretch of the season if they want to get a better seed in the NCAA tournament. Auburn is a 3 seed currently, so this would be a huge win for Kentucky. And when you look at what both teams have done recently, Kentucky has lost 3 of their last 5 games, and they had a historically bad streak for Kentucky standards. Kentucky lost their last 3 home games in a row at Rupp Arena for the first time since Rupp Arena was built, until they finally knocked off Ole Miss at home, and that's why so many Kentucky fans were mad at John Calipari. If you look at Auburn, they've only lost 1 of their last 5 games, which was a loss at Florida, which Kentucky also lost to Florida as well, but they lost at home. But a big difference here is that Kentucky lost to South Carolina earlier this season, whereas Auburn blew out South Carolina by 40 last time out. So that was a much more impressive win for Auburn than Kentucky beating Ole Miss by 12 points. The ESPN FBI predictor is not being kind to the Kentucky Wildcats, giving Auburn an 85% chance to win this game. I do not blame the computer metrics for favoring the Auburn Tigers by so much, because they're clearly playing better basketball right now than Kentucky, and that's what's so frustrating for Kentucky Wildcats fans, because this team has so much talent. Yes, there has been some injuries. Aaron Bradshaw has been banged up. A few other guys have been in and out of the lineup, but it doesn't matter. This basketball team should still be performing a little bit better than they are, and what's been the biggest issue for Kentucky is their defensive performance this season. If you look at what both teams have scored this season versus what they're giving up, Kentucky scores 89 points per game on offense, which is great. Their offense is one of the most dynamic in college basketball. They've got so much NBA talent, all those 5-star freshmen, and it's culminated in an exciting brand of basketball where Kentucky's running around up and down the floor, shooting a ton of threes, and they're knocking them down at a high rate, kind of like some of Calipari's vintage Kentucky teams. But their defense is bad. It's giving up 78 points per game, and games like the Tennessee game where they gave up over 100, they gave up 89 to Gonzaga, 94 to Florida. Their defense has to improve, or Kentucky will not advance far in the NCAA tournament this season. Whereas Auburn, they're scoring 83 points per game, which is very solid, and they're only giving up 67 points per game, so their defense is much better. But going back to Kentucky's roster full of talent, they got a lot of guys that can fill it up. Antonio Reeves is averaging 19 points per game and 4 boards, by far having his best season of college basketball, because he's putting up these numbers in the SEC, whereas he was at Illinois State before, where he played very well. He's almost putting up a 50-40-90 shooting splits between the free throw line, field goal percentage, and the three-point line. That's very impressive. Robert Dillingham's averaging 15 points per game, 3 rebounds, and 4 assists. He shoots very well at the three-point line. He struggles at the free throw line, but Robert Dillingham has been, as advertised, one of the best freshmen in college basketball. Reed Sheppard's averaging 12 points per game, 4 boards, and 4 assists. He has been a surprise this season, outperforming what people expected of him in the preseason. He's shooting 52% from 3. If you leave him open, he's not going to miss. So if you are Auburn, you got to have a guy on Reed Sheppard at all times. And then Trey Mitchell, DJ Widener, Justin Edwards all contribute at a high level, as well as a Duke Thero and Aaron Bradshaw, which is why this team averages 89 points per game. And they shoot very well from the three-point line. They shoot well from the free throw line as well, and they assist the ball at a high rate, and they are not a super turnover-prone team. It's just Kentucky's defense. If they're going to win this game, they have to slow down Bruce Pearl's squad, which is going to be hard because Auburn is a very deep team. You want to talk about Kentucky having a lot of talent and a lot of depth. Auburn, they might not have as much talent, but the depth is off the charts. This is one of the deepest teams in college basketball. basketball, very reminiscent of the Leonard Hamilton 2020 team that he had at Florida State, where he could go 10 deep on his roster, and Auburn is the exact same way. Johni Broome, he leads the Tigers with 16 points and 8 boards. He's playing better than he did last season. He's shooting well at the three-point line at 39%. Struggles at the free throw line, however. He'll have to knock down his free throws at a high rate to help out his team if they want to knock off Kentucky. Jalen Williams averages 13 points per game. And then between Chad Baker, Mazzara, all the way down to Dylan Cardwell, all of these guys average over 5 points per game. That is fantastic to have that many guys that all contribute. And then they have a couple other guys that come off the bench as well. Like I said, they average 83 points per game. They shoot only 34% from three. That's the weak link for Auburn. They are not as good of a three-point shooting team as the Kentucky Wildcats. Even though Auburn does have a couple guys that shoot well from the three-point line, they shoot 76% at the free throw line. They do assist the ball very well like Kentucky, and they are not a super turnover-prone team either. And another thing that's working in the Tigers' favor is that Auburn has won their last 3 games against the Kentucky Wildcats at home. It has been many years since Kentucky has been able to go to Auburn, Alabama, and knock off the Tigers on their raucous home floor. We know that Bruce Pearl's done a fantastic job making Auburn more of a basketball school as well as a football school. We know Auburn is a big football brand, but Bruce Pearl's definitely made Auburn a much better basketball team in the last few years, and they have some great home crowds, especially when they're playing top opponents. And while Kentucky has been able to knock off the Auburn Tigers on their own floor, it's going to be very tough for them to break the losing streak that they currently have at the Auburn Tigers. But who do I think is going to win this top 25 matchup in the SEC? I see arguments both ways where you can convince me that Kentucky will be able to go on the road and knock off Auburn, and I can also see arguments why Auburn is going to be able to knock off Kentucky on their own floor. Auburn's flat out playing better basketball, but Kentucky's the more talented team. Kentucky's been struggling at home lately, and ironically, they've actually been playing a little bit better on the road, but Auburn has been playing very well on their own floor, and the Tigers are one of the only teams in college basketball that can compete with the amount of depth that Kentucky has, because Auburn is a deeper team. Kentucky's talent, though, is going to make it a problem for the Tigers, and I do believe if Kentucky gets hot from outside, if Reed Sheppard, Robert Dillingham, Antonio Reeves, if they're all knocking down threes at a high rate and Kentucky can get the score up into the high 80s and the low 90s, Kentucky can very well win this game. But I think what's going to let down the Wildcats is they have not figured out their defensive issues. I know they held Ole Miss to only 63 points, but that was at home. And the fact Kentucky played very hard because they were desperate for a win, because they dropped all those games in a row at home. They really needed a win to stay in the SEC title race and to prevent a further slot in the NCAA tournament bracket. I think that Kentucky will play hard in this game as well, but I think their defense is going to let them down because Auburn has so much depth. Even though Auburn shoots a worse percentage at the three-point line, I think they're going to shoot well enough from outside on their own floor, and Auburn's going to knock down their free throws late to put Kentucky away. I think Auburn's going to knock off Kentucky 82-76. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, whether you believe that the Kentucky Wildcats can go on the road and knock off the Auburn Tigers and get some momentum back to John Calipari's squad, or whether you believe that the Auburn Tigers will be able to knock off Kentucky for the 4th straight time on their own floor, and for Bruce Pearl's squad to stay right in the thick of the SEC title race. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.